Gentleman from Alabama.
I thank the chairman. Secretary Geithner, this list of companies is to be kept secret. Is that correct?
Congressman, the central imperative is to make sure that institutions that could threaten the stability of the system are held to tougher constraints on leverage and risk-taking.
And capital and prudential.
Capital
regulation.
and liquidity.
Yeah.
And risk-taking generally.
Right.
That's the central lesson of this crisis, central imperative of reform. To do that, they have to know who they are. They should not be a fixed list. It may change over time because the system changes over time, but the central imperative is if you take on or could risk the stability of the system as a whole.
But you have to designate, it has to come on a list or it has to be designated if you're going to increase capital on them or prudential regulations or
exactly. And
so you will have a list. I mean, there will be these companies that you know of.
The way I would say it is this, and this is the system that exists today, although it didn't work as well as it needs to. Right now,
I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying.
No, but this is important. Right now, if you are a globally active bank, the capital requirements you are held to are different from and tougher than if you're a regional or community bank. So that's a system we have today. Now, those banks know who they are. They exist. They're designated as globally active banks.
I understand, but for instance, the SEC, these companies have to file with the SEC. They would have to make a material disclosure as to that they were.
Yeah, and it won't be a secret that they're held to tougher standards. It's very important that they are held to tougher standards, and you know that they're held to tougher standards.
So it will not be a secret. It will not be a secret.
No, it can't be, because again, they have to be. The purpose of it is so that they're held to tougher standards.
So everyone. So if not a secret, then people will know. I mean, I think it's a given that people can figure out quite quickly. When you raise capital restraints, require more capital, that'll be disclosed.
If they weren't held to higher capital requirements, we'd be making a mistake. If they were held to but nobody knew it, it wouldn't do any good.
Well, you say in this legislation that you can increase the capital requirement.
No, of course, exactly, and that's why I think it's designed this way. And it's very appropriate.
The market and the investors, the shareholders, they'll know that. In fact, the companies would have to disclose that.
Absolutely. Again, for the capital requirements, they have to exist to be tougher.
Right. And
the market will have to know they're held to tougher standards.
So the public would almost immediately realize who these companies were.
True, but Congressman, I think we're missing the key point. What you don't want to do is, by identifying a list of companies that are going to be held to tougher standards, create an expectation the government will step in and protect them if they screw up. Well, so it's a difficult balance. That's the balance you have to strike.
I know that you won't release it says there will not be a release of the companies on the list, okay? But by putting new requirements on them, I mean, people will realize quite quickly. In fact, those companies will have to disclose to investors and to the market and to the SEC and other regulators that they're under those constraints.
I don't think we're disagreeing, Congressman. I think if I understand it correctly, you're in favor of making sure that these firms can be held to higher standards. This is a way of doing that. No,
and let me say this: I'm not in favor of I'm not in favor of them being held to higher standards. But if we are to hold them to higher standards, I think the market's going to have to know.
But hold on, you would not impose tougher standards on the largest, most risky institutions than apply to a community bank or a regional bank?
All right, let me ask you this. Well, I'm not, because what you then do, you say that you're going to that you can loan these companies money.
No, I mean, I think that's a mischaracterization of this. What this does is make sure if in the future they get themselves in the position where they can't survive on their own,
right, then
the only authority we would have is to manage their failure without causing the economy to go through what this economy went in this crisis. That's the basic.
But under 1109, even a solvent company, you can have capital injections, you can invest in those institutions, you can buy their assets.
Again, Congressman, the important thing to recognize is, and it's just worth going back to what it was like last fall, without the ability for the government to step in, manage the failure of a large firm, and contain the risk of the fire spreading, we will be consigned to repeat the experience of last fall. It's a really stark, simple thing. And there is no, I know of no person who has stood in my seat, this is true for Chairman Paulson, in any central bank, in any major country, that would say the country should be run with no authority to step in and act in that case.
Well,
I don't think there's any credible
let me
advocate
ask you
for that.
this, Secretary. This may be my last question. You impose a tax on large and medium-sized financial institutions to pay?
Only if, as part of protecting the system from their failure, the government is exposed to losses. In that case, and only to that extent, would there be a fee assessed on institutions to cover it.
But
And
that's
to
a
protect
tax
the
on their
taxpayer.
competitors, is it not?
But that's, again, Mr. Kondrowski, can I borrow my time?
Yeah, Mr. Secretary,
From my
let me
time?
finish.
Okay.
But no further questions. Go.
Okay, this is a very important key thing. The system Congress designed for small banks and thrifts today works in a similar way. It's different because it's part of an explicit insurance regime. But in that case, if the government has to step in, and the FDIC does this every week, step in and manage the failure of a bank, if in that case the government assumes any risk of loss, it has to put a fee on institutions to recoup that loss over time so the taxpayer is protected. What we are doing is a very simple thing. We're taking that basic framework and we're adapting it to the system we have today. We should have done that 10 years ago, but we didn't do it. But it's a very simple thing. If the government is exposed to loss when it acts to protect the system, any risk of loss, it should assess a fee on banks over time to recoup that loss. That's to make sure the taxpayer is not in the position of absorbing those losses. That's the basic premise.
Of course, I think we all know that what they do now is
The gentleman's time has
that's
expired.
a fee on the insured deposits is what it is.
The gentleman's,
No, it goes beyond that.
look.